Howdy, folks. Brian Kusko here at Triple B, and I'm going to turn that thing down because it looks like it's probably blowing out you guys' eardrums. Let me see if I can go in here and mess with that for a second. Thank you guys for joining us tonight. I'm going to turn this filter off, and that should help with the blown out eardrums you're experiencing right now. There we go. Now we're cooking with the right kind of gas and not propane. No, the propane and not whatever it is. It's more explosive than propane. Thank you guys for joining us tonight. We've got a great guest on tonight, Mr. Nick Mutton, who I thought was a perfect follow-up to last week's guest, Mr. Justin Julander, since they are co-authors on the more complete Carpet Python. And also, I would like to mention that in the chat, Callistia Lance, is it good now? Is it good? Am I not too quiet? I know I took off that filter so that it wouldn't be too crazy. Okay, this is good now? Okay, perfect. Thank you guys for your feedback in the chat. I appreciate it. That's nice and quick. So yeah, we've got Mr. Nick Mutton on, very accomplished breeder and very knowledgeable guy, and somebody that's great to have on when you want to talk about pythons, which happen to be my favorite snake on the planet. Unless you include the indigo snake, I guess, maybe. But hey, you know what? Shout out to our sponsors, and let's roll the intro, and then I'll say a little bit more about Nick before we bring him on. You're watching Triple B TV. All right, folks. So I thought the best way to introduce Nick would be to show this super chat that was dropped before the stream even started by Mr. William Philippek over TJW Exotics. And I'm just going to read William's super chat right here verbatim. Oh, man, where do I start? Nick is a wealth of knowledge and someone who helped me in the beginning of growing my Morelia collection and also spending long hours on the phone with me. Hard to find a more professional breeder than him. And ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Nick Mutton. What's up, buddy?
Hey, good to be here.
Thank you for coming on, man. I appreciate it. So pythons, that's kind of your expertise. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
All right. Would you say that you've bred more species? Okay, so I forgot to mention in the monologue that I did get the pleasure of meeting you at Travis's place at Southwest Carpet Fest when he hosted. That was my first Carpet Fest, and I think I'm pretty certain that's a snake from your line. My only carpet python that I do have is from your line, the Caramel Coastal that Travis had produced.
Yeah, Travis got them all for me.
Yeah, right. And I remember you mentioning there at that barbecue that you were kind of like in a little competition with a buddy of yours to see who could breed the most species of python before the end.
No, I've fallen a bit behind in that. My very good friend Ryan Young has really run away with it in the last couple of seasons. He's had just a ridiculous, like, once in a lifetime year where he knocked out like 5 more species, all in the same calendar year. So I've got some work to do to catch up.
All right.
I think in the who's bred the most species in the history of herpetoculture, he's now the #1 guy. And then VPI, he's a couple of 2 ahead of VPI even. And I'm 3 behind VPI. So I'm bringing up the rear in 3rd place. But
so you mean most python species? Or just
most species bred. Not numbers. No one will ever match VPI in total numbers probably. But number of species, taxonomically recognized species bred. Apparently #3. I should pass VPI in the next 2 seasons.
Well, 3rd place at least puts you're on the pedestal still in 3rd place. So.
Yeah, nobody wants the bronze though. If I didn't really just totally despise short-tailed pythons this much, I'd probably already be there. I just don't like them.
Really?
They're horrible.
Well, okay, I gotta know what's so horrible about short-tailed pythons.
I guess I just have a pair of T-negative reds, and they're just horrible animals, and it's really soured me on it. The other 2 species aren't so bad, I suppose.
Frogs on your arm? Like what do you mean by horrible?
I mean, they're just untrustworthy. They bite constantly. They're just nasty. And without being too crude or anything, I think it's fair to say they're biologically the way they work is they they eat and eat and eat and drink and nothing happens and nothing happens. They store it up for like a month, and then when they finally drop a bomb in their cage, it's literally like an elephant took a dump in his cage, and it's like a half a gallon of fluid comes out all at once. It's just disgusting, and then nothing for like a month. It's just, yeah. I'm not. I can't get into them. I'm sorry.
Well, I
My
mean,
lack of enthusiasm because they're easy to breed though. If I just breed those 3 species, I'll pass VPI. And that's what I'm just gonna have to make myself do.
that's so funny. I'd say they're relatively easy to breed too. So they pass that pedal, but you're not willing to work with the randomly explosive. So you would prefer like retics that piss every other day versus a blood python that just stores it up for one special day? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, one very special day. No, I'm not much for. I mean, retics is a whole nother, kettle of fish there. But and a whole. I mean, I could wax poetically about everything that's wrong with retics. I mean, that would take a whole conversation into itself. So I don't do a lot with retics because the retic gene pool is just so completely destroyed at this point that for someone like me, it's just I'm not interested in some 6-way hybrid morph combo, whatever. It's just and that's all that exists in retic land for the most part these days. So
Fair enough. Well, hey, you are somebody who's clearly a hobbyist breeder, also professional. But how? So you're in a special category for me, at least. I mean, you're one of the few folks that was invited to be a guest speaker at Herpeton, which is kind of bordering on the scientific community, I'd say, if not full on into the scientific community. Um, so and you have a lot of experience, 30 years at least in breeding. Uh, what do you see that's different, better, or different, worse in the hobby today? Maybe both. Like what has progressed and what seems to have regressed?
I think I mean, what's gotten better is we've gotten very good at keeping and breeding things to the point where it's just become routine. 30 years ago, people weren't breeding ball pythons. It was like, and much earlier than that, it was considered difficult to breed ball pythons actually. And now we've entirely domesticated them. So our ability to maintain, keep, and breed things has never been better. The amount of products that are now available to us. I mean, when I was getting into it as a hobbyist, I had some Jackson's chameleons that a friend brought back from Hawaii and everything, and had babies because they're always pregnant. And it was very difficult to get them to eat anything because no one was culturing fruit flies then. There's just none of this stuff around. The quality of UV bulbs was vastly inferior to what we take for granted today. So on the technology and product front, it's light years better than it used to be. And our ability to do this is so much increased because everybody stands on the shoulders of the generation before them who blazed that trail. And now we take for granted that we have all this stuff and we can breed all this stuff. The downside is I think the hobby has lost its way in a couple of big ways, in that it used to be that the things that were expensive and sought after that you wanted to have and you pursued were rare and difficult things, and that was what was considered desirable. And so, but that mindset pushed people to keep and breed and establish more difficult lineages and species in the hobby, and that's almost all gone now. Now all we champion is the trivial and the insignificant. It's not about breeding some rare thing for the most part. It's about breeding the latest greatest mutant of a very easy thing, and then patting ourselves on the back repeatedly for having done so. So I think the priority shift towards mutations has had profoundly negative consequences. It's brought a lot of people in, but they're just in it because they like genetically broken animals. I think it's like there's not that drive to establish new stuff and new species and progress. Our knowledge of herpetoculture has completely stalled for the sake of all the cages being taken up by mutants, basically. And I'm not anti-morph per se. I have lots of morph snakes, lots of them. But I think we've lost any semblance of balance in the hobby where, I mean, let's be honest, if most ball python people would never own a normal ball python. There's almost a certain level of disdain for the natural appearance of the most popular species in the world. It's like it's an animal is now not, it's not it's deemed utterly worthless for the crime of being not a mutant, not having enough desirable mutations. Ergo, it is worthless. A couple of years ago, that point was driven home. I accidentally produced a normal ball python. Accidentally, it was a parthenogen, so the pairing should not have been able to produce a normal, but because it was a partho clutch, there was a normal wild type parthogenic female in the clutch. And I was only able to give the snake away for nothing because it had an interesting story and it was a female that didn't have a father. And so for that reason, I was able to find someone to take it off my hands for nothing. Other than that, I think that's gone too far. If you profess to love a species so much, but you would never even you have no appreciation for what it's naturally supposed to look like. I mean, it doesn't have to be all one or all the other, but I think the pendulum has swung so far towards that side of it and that mindset that it's, I think that's not doing the hobby any favors in the long run.
I hear everything you're saying. I like VPI's book. They bring up the point of like how beautiful a normal ball python is in their book, and I think that's a great thing that they bring up because it is. A wild type ball python has some pretty amazing looking things going on with it. As far as not being able to find somebody that only want to take it for free, maybe it's because you're a carpet python guy or because you don't have those pet circles. One thing that I know that we have as breeders is a big circle and a big circle of breeders who really are in kind of a bubble where we're in this world where there's still this enormous population that I know you're aware of people that are pet keepers who are not part of the breeding at all, and they far outnumber us, but we don't really see them much on a day-to-day basis because we're in our breeder circles and stuff, but there are people like people like this person right here who has no idea what a coral glow ball python is, but just loves a snake for a snake. In fact, her favorite snake it's good timing there, by the way, T. Her favorite snake in this entire room happens to be a chocolate, who is a normal ball python, and so it's people like them that I think are going to be
taste.
Yeah, has good taste, and they're going to be bringing it back, and I think that the people that you're talking about are probably mostly breeders. Is that fair to say?
Yes, but ultimately those people are the ones responsible for what do the pet owners get to choose from. They can only choose from the things that the breeders choose to breed, which is, at this point, I mean, I don't know. I don't dislike morphs. I don't have any problem with the morph side of the hobby, except for I just wish people would at least maintain some appreciation for what their animals are naturally supposed to look like. You don't have to be on. This is one of the few instances where riding the fence is perfectly fine. You can like mutants and that kind of stuff. You can appreciate wild types, but I think in certain parts of the hobby, it's gone so far to the extreme that it's probably to an unhealthy place. The retics are probably a better example, or it's just, the gene pool is permanently screwed up and it will never be able to be repaired because of morphs. It's, all these retic morphs are all in different species because retics, turns out, are a clade of snakes. They're not all the same species. There's about 5 to 7 species of retic, species of them. And they're all permanently mixed up, never to be able to be separated because some morph occurred on some island in Indonesia and then they had to breed it to everything. And I think it's an indictment of the hobby, frankly, that one of the hardest things you could have to try to find would be a pure Malaya python reticulatus. Find a pure reticulatus. It's not easy. They're virtually all hybrids at this point. They're all mixed up. You can't find a wild type pure reticulatus. It's like it will be a difficult proposition. They're all going to have some sort of dwarf blood in them. Not a pure retic at that point, is it? It's a hybrid. And a wild retic is one of the most beautiful snakes in the world. Like just the natural there. If ever there was a snake that didn't need morphs, retics are stunningly beautiful animals in their natural form. And I don't know. I think in that case, once people thought and told themselves, "Oh, I can do this. It doesn't matter. We'll just get imports and everything." And then, Lacey Act listing. Now you can never get imports and your gene pool is closed. And even that didn't seem to wake anybody up to this fact. They just kept progressing right down that road of, super dwarf morph combo nonsense to where now that's all we have, and that's all anybody is going to have in the hobby going forward. In 30 years, no one looking at reticulated pythons or what remains of them in 30 years. No one's going to look back at the current generation of retic breeders and say, "Boy, I'm sure glad they did that." They're going to lament the fact that they can never get a pure any of this stuff because that decision was made for them by the guys who came before, who decided it was much funner to mix it all up. And that, I mean, you see it time and time again in the hobby, and that's the downside of where we're at these days. Yes.
Do you think some of that is born out of how easy it is now to breed those snakes versus like you mentioned, ball pythons were considered difficult to breed back in the day, and maybe a lot of different species. Maybe there are less species now that are at that point. I mean, today I guess there's a oh my gosh, well, I'm spacing on the name of the snake right now. You notice a Bolin's python, sorry, python Bolini. They're one of those ones still that really difficult to breed in captivity. Not many people, nobody in the United States, I think, has done it yet. And do you think it's because part of
There've
it
been
is
a handful of breeding. I know of 3 or 4 breedings in the United States, but of Bolin's pythons, but it's not done often for sure, and it's certainly not a common event. But that is, again, if there's only so much cage space, there's only so much money, there's only so many people who are serious about breeding pythons. And if the overwhelming majority of that cage space is taken up by morph retics and ball pythons and mixed up boa constrictor morphs and all of this sort of stuff, that means that there is, by definition, less people, less money, and less cage space to put into breeding Bolin's pythons. So here we are 30 years later, and Bolin's pythons are no better off in terms of captive breeding than they were 20 years ago. We haven't made any progress at all, really, on that front because all the attention, all the money, everything has gone towards, making new mutations and combinations of easy to breed stuff. 25 years ago, 30 years ago, I was getting in the hobby. Timor pythons were super rare and almost never bred in captivity. 30 years later, they're super rare and almost never bred in captivity. Absolutely zero progress has been made. They're no more readily available than they ever have been. And they're not, it's just because nobody's trying, because they're trying to do all this other stuff. It's not a priority for anybody. And that is, I think that's, I don't know. Like I said, my appeal to the masses is not to ditch all your morph projects, far from it, but it is, I mean, I'd like to see the pendulum swing back to some sort of equilibrium where this other stuff might get its day and a little bit more attention and less focus on some of these other things. So.
I know some folks that are pretty good or big ball python breeders who are also working with some of that stuff, and it's kind of in their side window, and maybe that will swing and it'll come into that forefront. And as you're talking about this stuff, I'm kind of reminded of my days, my early single digit days of going and checking out the East Bay Vivarium and looking at all the different snakes. And there was, to your point, there were no morphs that I remember looking at. Maybe there was like an albino or something of some, but not even that. It was more the different species that were really intriguing and that they had. I remember looking at indigo snake back then, thinking, "Well, that's different. That's crazy," and just looking at all the different species. There wasn't a whole load of morphs to look at because maybe they didn't even exist yet back in the mid '80s. But if it does, what do you think it looks like for it to swing the other way? And also, I do think that some of the morphs maybe do attract a lot of the kids and a lot of positive attention from people getting into caring about snakes. What do you think about? That was kind of a double question there that might be hard to answer. What do you think about that?
I think that, I mean, I don't want to endlessly beat up on the ball python community, but it's so massive in terms of its size compared to, if you added up every other species of reptile and amphibian that's kept in the entire earth in captivity and you added it all together, it wouldn't even come close to the number of ball pythons. It's just that dominant of a thing. And it's not uncommon for most of these, even hobbyists, to have 100 ball pythons, 200 ball pythons. It's not uncommon at all. And what I'm saying is that if all those people with 100 ball pythons and they've got 100 CB70s, if they would just put one pair of Savu pythons in that same tub and then have 98 ball pythons and one pair of Savu pythons, the hobby would be better. If everybody devoted 1% of their resources to some obscure rare thing that there aren't enough of, it make a huge difference in the hobby. And there's just, and I do see some of that starting to happen now. So maybe the tide is turning a little bit. But I mean, you would not even believe the amount of effort that I put into things that are not commercially viable. But somebody's got to keep these things going. Somebody has to keep these bloodlines going, or they will disappear. And when they're gone, they're just gone. So I find myself having to be some sort of genetic repository for obscure bloodlines of this or that. And I mean, as a single individual, I can only do so much. But at this point, I don't have much confidence that other people will pick up the ball and run with it. And we've seen tons of examples of that. I think of like Bert Langerwerf. I mean, an absolute legend in lizard breeding. I mean, one of the absolute pioneers of the hobby. He bred, well, just in making more recently, before he passed, he had bred a ton of Australian water dragons, a ton of them. They were readily available and cheap because Agama International was cranking them out. You could get them for $50, $60 because he was making so many of them. He produced thousands and thousands and thousands of them, and then he died. And the group got broken up and sold off, and now you're lucky if you can find a single one for $600. They're 10 times more expensive and almost impossible to find because out of the thousands of animals that he produced, virtually nobody kept it going. And now they're on their way to just not even being available in the hobby that quickly. And that's because everybody assumed that Bert would apparently do this forever and that they didn't need to breed their animals or keep these things going. I don't know. I'd like the hobby to have a little bit more foresight. It's not only about what you want at this moment and whatever trivial thing you're interested in right now. There is a long game to be played as well. The only reason anybody has the animals they have access to now is because the previous generation produced those animals and left us a pretty awesome hobby. And I would like to see more people put a little bit more thought into paying it forward to the next generation that's going to come after them. What is the next generation going to inherit from the current group of people? And it's going to be a lot of mutant ball pythons and a lot of hybrid retics, apparently, and not a whole lot, not as much other stuff as there probably should be. And that I think is regression. I can't see how that's progress.
Well, you make some solid points, and every time I talk to somebody like yourself, I just get more fired up about the hobby and some of the. Unfortunately, I mean, I am glad that we're having this conversation, and I'm not somebody that has only ball pythons sitting around here in my room. Otherwise, I'd be
There's
probably pretty hurt and offended.
nothing wrong with ball pythons at all. Nothing wrong with them at all. It's the mindset of the hobby where has gotten to a point where the only thing that matters is mutations. It's the only thing. What's the number one question you see on any Facebook group or whatever? Is somebody gets some random snake, doesn't even matter what species it is, and the first question they ask is, what morph is this? Because it has to be a morph, because everything's a morph. There's no reason. Why would it even be alive? Why does it exist if not to be a morph? It's like the idea that things have a natural non-morph appearance doesn't even occur to people anymore. It's like, it's what morph is this? Because why would anyone have produced it if it wasn't a morph, right?
Well, to bring it back to our original starting here, like I've got blood pythons are one thing I do produce aside from ball pythons. I've got a few other species too, so I feel like I like that you mentioned that if people would just put like a couple different snakes in place of what could have been, because I've got the indigo that I'm trying to work with, and I've got some scrubs and a couple other species that I'd really like to work on producing. And blood pythons are one that I've been successful with so far, and they do look their natural look without any mutation, I think is gorgeous. So I think it's funny that it's the one that I'll produce some for you, and you can take the credit if you want. Maybe
I need some Borneos now, but I need to add some Borneos. But
gotcha.
no, what your collection, as you've described, is exactly what I would encourage other people. Even if you're mostly breed ball pythons or boa constrictor morphs or whatever, if just a little bit of 5%, 2%, a couple of tubs. If everybody did that, even at a very small scale, a lot of this stuff wouldn't be so rare and it would be more available. I think we'd have a better, richer hobby for that tiny investment of tub space, basically.
I hear you. I hear you, man. And I'm also a person that I mean I love ball pythons, but I do appreciate the diversity of snake. I like all snakes. All snakes intrigue me. I like to see all the differences. And it's like was it variety is the spice of life type of thing, right? And all these different species are incredible and all deserve, I think, the same amount of attention as a ball python is getting today. So I agree with you in that respect for sure. Is there, so we're coming close to the very end. Is there anything you'd like to share before we move backstage?
I'm kind of drawing a blank, which is pretty uncharacteristic for me, really.
Well, you put out some really good, solid, strong opinions there.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's what's the point of going on a show and having a discussion if you're not going to talk about a substantive issue and something that's real and actually matters, and if you're not going to, encourage people to think and and engage them in their mind and everything, there's really no point, and just kind of fluff, I guess.
Agreed.
Talk about. So everybody should take my advice. Just 2 tubs in your CB70, the top left corner, just put a pair of Dunn's pythons or something. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Something obscure. And I think if people did that, they'd find there's a lot of really cool things out there that they might really enjoy keeping.
Fair enough. Hey, if there's any folks that maybe are hearing you speak for the first time tonight, where can they go and find your different bodies of work?
I put out a few books, the most recent being the More Complete Carpet Python with as you mentioned at the start, with my frequent co-author, Justin Julander. I'm the easiest guy in the world to find and get a hold of, probably. So if anybody wants to get a hold of me, it will not be difficult.
All right, awesome, man. Well, hey, Nick, I really appreciate your time and your honesty and your opinions here on the show. They're good. I hope people take what you said to heart. I'll see you backstage on the after show there if you're good.
I'm good. I'll see you then.
All right, man. See you in a little bit. All right, folks. Thank you for tapping in with us tonight and tuning in and participating with us. We really appreciate it. Nick really appreciates it. We all appreciate it. Yeah, great guy and full of knowledge. And I do like his ideas. Having diversity in your collection is certainly something that I think more people should aspire to, and branch out to different species, because different species of snakes are amazing. And for all the reasons Nick said, I don't really need to say anything on top of what he already said, because he said it already very well. But yeah, again, just a great show, I think, to have Nick on. Last time we had him on was when he was doing his Herpeton talk, so it wasn't actually on the show, but there'll be a link down in the description for that talk at Herpeton that he gave if you didn't see that already. Next week, we very well may be having on a blood python breeder who's done a lot with the species of blood pythons. That's not for certain, but maybe. And we're going to an after party right now. There's a link in the description if you want to join us there. If we don't see you there, we'll be a little bit sad, but if we don't, we'll see you next week on triplebtv. They'll take care.